There's a million NDAs I'm breaking right now, but I've gotta say my piece. I've contemplated whether the risks are worth it by telling this story online, but considering that I've not got long to live on this earth anyways, I think that the pros outweigh the consequences. In a way, I guess this is sort of like an autobiography of sorts. I have no family, no one to care for me when I'm gone. I guess I just want to be remembered, by someone, somewhere. I'm not detailing the events that come later in this story to blow the whistle on anything. Even if I did, the damned company probably hit its tracks too well. No, this story, if you wish to call it that, is a confession from a night watchman. I never managed to do more than work at a McDonald's growing up through high school, and between that and taking my dad to the VA clinic every week meant that I never had a chance to get any actionable job experience besides flipping burgers. When I turned 25, my father died, and a few of his old airborne buddies came to his funeral. One of them, Carl, was especially close to him. We each said our piece about him. The man was buried 6 feet deep, and just like that the life of a man was over. I didn't really cry on his deathbed nor at his funeral, had too many things to plan for, like his wake, the guest list, the after-funeral luncheon, but when I saw a man who looked just like him, down to the facial expressions and his laugh, walk into the restaurant we were having lunch at, I just broke down in front of everyone. Grief has a weird sense of humor. Your dad's dead, and you won't break down at his funeral or his deathbed, but then he'll send in someone who looks just like him down to the wrinkles and smile on his face to make you just lose it in front of everyone. I never realized what Dad had done during the war. When I asked him about it, he always said he didn't want to talk about it. We shared the rest of the car ride to Carl's house talking about Dad's life, like the time him and the boys threw a massive foot-long centipede into another squad's tent, the time he body slammed a VC and bashed their head open with his M60, meeting a guy who claimed to be CIA going around giving beers to people of all things, how he eventually stopped being able to walk when I was 15, and how he had to be hooked up to an oxygen tank when I was 17. When we arrived at Carl's house, he offered me a job. Turns out some people really were born with a silver spoon in hand. Because he turned out to have inherited his father's small security company, so he offered me a starting position, as a favor to my late father. After handing in my resignation at the burger joint I worked in, I got a security certification and started working at Carl's company. It wasn't too bad, all things considered. I started small, working day security at strip malls, and later on in my career, at night I worked as a night watchman. For $5 an hour in 1983 money, it wasn't too bad for what was ostensibly a warm body in a box job. During my night shifts I read books about biology, Tolkien, all the greats, and watched old Twilight Zone reruns on the old Panasonic portable TV, hiding it away when my supervisor came. All was well until one night I saw an intruder on the CCTV trying to break into a supply shed on my site. I walked out, mag light in hand, to confront the individual. It was a drug addict trying to steal copper wires from some old conduit lines. I yelled at him to stop, and the bastard turned around with crazed eyes, charging at me with his knife. I bopped him on the head out of instinct with my mag light, but he kept charging at me, and knocked me on my ass. He didn't stop until a fellow guard ran to my assistance, kicking him off me as I laid on the ground dazed. When the police came, I was still shaking like a leaf from the adrenaline 10 minutes later. As the medics cleared me, it turned out the man had tried to slit my throat with his knife. I can still feel the cold steel on my throat. Even after all these years, it's like the knife had imprinted itself onto my skin. The only thing that saved me from that fate was the fact that the knife was blunt. I can still recall the feeling of my flesh bruising, the skin shifting around my neck muscles as the madman tried to saw his knife into my neck. I decided to work armed security from there on. I got certified with a baton, and got my armed guard card 3 months later. A .38 caliber Smith & Wesson Model 10 rode on my hip from then on. After a few more years of dealing with druggies and violent winos, I had built up quite a reputation with Carl's security firm. Carl wrote me a recommendation for my exemplary work as a night watchman. My reports were well written, my documentation was meticulous, and I never even had to fire a single shot in anger. I bid him farewell, and from there I got a new posting, and worked night security at a university where they had an animal biosafety level 2 lab located on site. I did my usual duties, patrol around the outside for about 10 minutes, go into a locked log box and sign in to verify my presence. Then it's back inside for hot coffee and some more Twilight Zone reruns on that shitty old Panasonic portable. I only got paid $5.25 for this posting. After another couple of months of this and I had enough. At the time, my ego deemed myself overqualified to just be paid 25 cents more an hour than my last job. At the time I thought it was insulting. Did they even know how expensive it was to obtain an armed security license in California? So after a row with my supervisor I put in my 2 weeks and left. I wished I had just swallowed my pride and just kept that job, but we all know what monstrosities and follies ego beget. Young men are impatient, at times rather impulsive. That's how I got into trouble. For the next 2 months or so I lived off my savings. My diet was never the most healthy, but eating McDonald's day and night at my old job meant I saved quite a lot of money. I eventually got an interview with a firm called Multinational Biologics Applied, a medium-sized firm located in South San Francisco, just an hour's drive from where I lived. The hiring application needed security guards who were trained or experienced working in A/BSL-2 or above labs to apply, and I signed on along with 10 other guys. We were all excited, but I couldn't shake the feeling of how the whole thing seemed strange. For one, they had hired us as armed security. Typically for corporate security jobs like this, it wouldn't really make sense to have armed security, as our jobs were merely to observe and report to the police. We weren't guarding a 711 in Skid Row. This was a sector of South SF with a massed concentration of high-tech companies. So cops regularly patrol this area day and night. It would have made more sense for the company to just hire us as unarmed security instead. After all, it was much cheaper to have unarmed security, less liability too, especially since multinational was hiring in-house guards. Worst case scenario is that we might have some of those bleeding heart types that try to break in and free some of the test animals. Not that it would do them any good. Some of these animals were engineered with down-regulated tumor suppressor genes in order to test for anti-cancer therapies, some were specifically bred with immune deficiencies for AIDS research, and the list goes on and on. But I digress. Orientation went on. We sat through 2 hours of briefings on procedures and chains of command, SOPs on what to do if there are intruders. Using the new electronic DTEX watch clock systems, ID card activation and deactivation, using the computer control consoles in our posts, patrol routes, payroll, etc. The usual presentations flew by. I'm no rookie to this. After all, I worked the industry for almost 6 years. I've arrested intruders, clocked in almost 1,000,000 times, almost shot another druggie trying to steal copper piping from an old industrial site. Then our security chief came up to the podium. He was a stocky man, handlebar mustache, graying slicked back hair, and a stainless steel Model 66.357 Magnum rode on his hips. My guess at the time was ex-military of some kind. Chief Harold Warner spoke in a southern accent, I'm guessing Virginia, and went through the usual spiel of welcome to the company. We look forward to blah blah blah. Then Chief Warner took a more serious tone. I could still remember what he said to us in that moment to this day. Gents, by making it this far you have nearly crossed a point of no return. In a few moments we will be handing out some non-disclosure agreements for you all to sign. Should we find out that you have at any point in time disclosed the nature of our employer's work or research, you will be found in breach of contract. Your employment and pensions will be revoked, and you will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Anybody who wishes to not sign this NDA, may do so, but know that you will no longer be employed by Multinational Biologics Applied. Your time today will be clocked by personnel, and your paychecks will be mailed out to your addresses within the week. There was a pregnant pause in the small conference room. NDAs were not uncommon for these types of corporate jobs. After all, in the cutthroat field of biotech research there was much money to be made, but research was hard, time-consuming, and expensive. Corporate espionage was not unheard of in this industry, but considering the tone of our future boss, everyone mulled over the decision. Something about the way he spoke rubbed all 10 of us in the room the wrong way. There was a sense of urgency in his voice, imperceptible to most people, but working security gave you a sense of sussing out if someone was bullshitting you. "Oh no man, I was just smoking a cigarette." "What do you mean leave man? I've got a ticket dude." You hear enough excuses about kids smoking cigarettes and nothing else. Or people pretending to have a ticket trying to sneak into a movie theater. You get a sense if someone's trying to hide something. The fact that there were 10 of us being hired onto a pretty damn good paying job all at once was also a bit strange to me at the time. Typically these positions are pretty competitive, a full pension, our $20 per hour pay rate, full benefit for a non-salaried position. You would have 10-year industry veterans chomping at the bits to get a sliver of what this posting had to offer. I'd only expect at most 2 or 3 of new guys being inducted, but there were 10 of us being hired all at once. Hell, I only applied to the job on a lark, thinking there's no way they'd hire someone like me. I was experienced, sure, but there were guys out there with way more than me who could have easily been more qualified than I am. In hindsight, this should have been my cue to leave. The whole thing stank with the smell of too good to be true flavored bullshit. I was too greedy, naive, or both. We all signed the NDA, and after a few minutes of reading and signing, a woman came in and collected our contracts. Not really any backing out now. The chief smiled, and welcomed us to the team. The lights came on, and we all went on a tour of the facility. The first 3 levels of the ground level building were mostly conference rooms and office spaces. We walked past workers milling about in their cubicles, typing away on computers and calling clients, scrolling through Rolodexes, banging on fax machines and printers. A few guys at the water cooler talking about the Giants or the 49ers. Then we walked past a set of double doors on the ground level garage room and into a large elevator. Warner took a keycard from his belt and swiped it against a console, and keyed in his code, and hit L1. The elevator took us to one of the 3 underground sections. When we got out we were a bit shocked to say the least. L1 looked like something out of a bunker. Concrete walls with steel bolt reinforcements driven into the arches of the wall, harsh CFC bulbs lit up the damp corridor. There was a smell of mildew lingering in the air. I can still remember it clearly. Honestly, thinking about it now still gives me nightmares even to this day. The tunnel that the elevator opened into was wide. Wide enough to fit a whole semi-truck, but the concrete construction, the moisture seeping in through the cracks of the wall, all of it seemed so claustrophobic. The tunnel led to a central atrium about 50 yards in. The wooden cargo crates and small Conex containers lined the sides of the tunnel. The center of the atrium housed a small security desk with a uniformed guard sitting in the middle, watching CCTV monitors. It split off into 2 other tunnels, one labeled Animal Labs and the other security/storage areas. Men and women in lab coats were walking through our group as Warner stopped and asked the guard to let us in. The glass door that slid open to let us in were pretty thick. Strong enough to withstand bullets. Warner gave us a tour of L1, told us how this was a cargo storage and BSL-2 lab section. Apparently, the site of our building used to be part of an ammo dump network the Army Corps of Engineers dug into the east side of the Bay Area Peninsula during the war. Huge 200mm coastal artillery shells would be stored here in case the Japanese or the Germans invaded the west coast. After the war, the Army kept the facilities to store vehicles and arms for the National Guard unit in San Francisco, until the 70s, when the Army sold or leased it to private buyers and local city departments. The one by Fort Funston and the SF Zoo was to be turned into a water treatment plant by 95 foot. I drove by that on the Great Highway before. Smelled like shit. We arrived at the main security control room a minute later. Stepping inside there were stacks of manila folders with each of our names on it. Leafing through the binders there were a series of SOPs on specific scenarios, layouts of the facilities 1 to 3, and L1, the typical orientation dossiers. Warner specifically stated how we would only be guarding the ground level facilities for now, and that we would later be transferred into the lower levels. We would be guarding the main ground surrounding the building, and finally L1, and how no one was to venture down to L2 and L3 unless a Code June was in effect. I flipped to the page labeled Code June, and found a hermetically sealed opaque plastic folder with a perforated rip-away edge. It was labeled clearly, Plan, June, do not open unless authorized by your supervisor or if code, June has been declared. One of us asked Warner about what code June or Plan June was. Warner simply rattled off some rote statement about how that was on a need-to-know basis, but the gist was that code June had something to do with evacuating security evacuation plans of L2 and L3 in case of fire. We all knew it was something else, even Warner had that knowing look, but we moved on to the rest of the tour of the main security. I remember leafing through the rest of the SOP book. It was odd. There were plans for nuclear material leaks, nitrogen and freon gas leaks, power loss, intruders, a fire plan, an earthquake plan, and even tsunami evacuation procedures, but none of these were ever in regards to L2 and L3. It seemed that Code June and Plan June were the only procedures regarding levels L2 and L3, and they were on a need-to-know basis. At the time I couldn't for the life of me figure out why. There were so many strange things about this place. Multinational Biologics Applied was originally a company founded by ex-DARPA employees, in connection with some Japanese and German biotech firms. From my research at the time looking at their brochures and whatnot, I learned they were working with the HIV virus and developing novel cancer therapies using chimerically rearranged antigens on T cells, insecticides, herbicides. They were even researching ways of using bacteria or archaea to break down nuclear waste into nuclear fuel. AIDS had just become a thing right when my dad died. We used to call it the gay disease. In 89 foot most of the guards were a bit afraid of that fact when we learned about the research taking place at MBA, as we were working with monkeys, rats, mice, etc. No guard wanted to be involved with an escaped monkey and get the AIDS. Of course, having read so much about biology in my spare time sitting around in a small shack during those cold winter nights assuaged my fears of getting zoonotic transmission of SIV from these test animals. We were told to get dressed and gear up. We were issued the typical fare, leather duty belts, radios, pens, logbooks, a collapsible baton, a .38 revolver, spare ammo, a mag light, handcuffs, gray shirt sleeve uniforms, gray BDU pants, black boots, you know the rest. This was 1989 we were talking about. When we saw the rest of the room it felt like they were having us guard a WMD disposal site. There were CBRN decontamination kits, loaded with things like atropine and pralidoxime auto-injectors, which were meant to prevent nerve agents like VX and sarin from causing your muscles to seize up and literally asphyxiating you to death as your diaphragm and lung spasm and you slip into complete respiratory failure or simply cardiac arrest. Essentially, most organophosphorus-based nerve agents like VX or sarin arrested the enzymatic activity of acetylcholinesterase, an enzyme which degrades the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, a molecule responsible for conducting muscular contractions in our muscle cells. If acetylcholine is not degraded in between the neuron and muscle cell and is simply allowed to build up in the synaptic cleft, it will cause continual contraction of the muscle cell, leading to continual seizures, diaphragm supercontractions, neural excitotoxicity, and the list goes on. They had diazepam injectors available for those undergoing seizures from nerve agent exposure as well. Warner explained how this lab was working with a lot of different experiments, each with their own hazards, for instance the use of CTXs, helitoxins, colchicinoids, beta-alkaloids, organophosphorus-based toxins, all of which can arrest cellular mitosis via inhibition of tubulin formation, straight-up mitochondrial poisoning and metabolic poisoning, necrosis and induced apoptosis, and the list goes on. Just a single speck of dust-sized particles can kill a man within a few hours. As such, both the lab medical unit and security teams were equipped with a complement of PPE and post-exposure medications. Warner then took us through the showers and lockers, to a small room on the side with a window. The armorer started handing us our duty weapons. We were issued 6-shot Model 15 to 6.38 caliber revolvers, loaded with what I think were 158 grain lead cast semi-wad cutters hollow points. The box said +P on it. These things were pretty new looking, no wear or tear on the finish, no dents or scratches from being dropped or banged against a concrete wall. These things looked completely new in box, like the company had just recently purchased these. In fact, I noted at the time that most of our equipment was pretty much brand new. No scuffs on our leather pouches and holsters, brand new flashlights. Everything was factory new in box almost. You have to understand, security guards at the time typically didn't buy our own stuff. We might have our own boots, or maybe our own belts and belt keepers, maybe our own weapons, but everything down from the holster, the pouches, the radios, all of that was company or client issued. It wouldn't make sense to keep buying new stuff for every new guard on the job. The point was, a lot of security guards typically got hand-me-downs from our predecessors, and while the other guys were oohing and eyeing over our new stuff, I still couldn't shake the sense of unease. Everything had to happen for a reason, so why did this company give us all fancy new in-box equipment? I tried to brush off this strange occurrence as just the company buying new equipment because they were expanding the security team. As if the whole thing didn't seem strange enough, the next door Warner opened only made the whole ordeal even stranger. When we stepped into the armory proper, we saw the concrete walls had been lined with steel wall lockers which when opened revealed racks of surplus M16A1S, Remington 12 gauges, and tactical vests. This was a lot of firepower for what supposedly a small security detail. An armor rack was also next to the gun racks. Rows of black painted surplus steel helmets fitted with a riot visor and flak jackets adorned the cabinets. Today you might see a few security guards wearing armored vests, but back then that was unheard of, and especially not a riot helmet and body armor. The armory even had what I thought to be riot control agents like CS gas canisters, and gas masks. The company wasn't outfitting us to be a security detail, they were gearing us up like a SWAT team. Stranger still, there was another gun rack lined with unfamiliar rifles. After asking around I found out that these were custom-made CO2 actuated dart rifles firing .50 caliber ballistic syringes. One of my co-workers, David, said these were Anschutz air rifles, same brand as the ones he used to shoot with back at the shooting clubs in Germany, but these rifles appeared to be completely custom made of stainless steel construction, with dual steel CO2 cylinders mounted to either side. A bolt-action locking breech, a rubberized pistol grip, rail-mounted Thompson center collimator sight, and a barrel clamp-mounted Surefire light and laser sight. The thing looked and felt like one of those old anti-tank rifles I'd seen in WW2 documentaries. There were also thermo-molded padded boxes of darts the length of a ballpoint pen and thick as a man's finger. The labels on the boxes were labeled Moro 709. I asked around, and at the time I found out that these were supposedly tranquilizer darts. Now, I understand that animal testing labs were supposed to carry some complement of animal recapture devices, should any test organisms escape, but these were usually smaller 5 to 10 cc darts. These ones seemed big enough to slip a bull elephant into a coma. I didn't ask too many questions, the job was too good. We were going to be paid $20 an hour, plus full dental and medical. I could finally set myself up a nice nest egg, finally move out of the roach-infested hovel my landlord called a studio apartment. So I kept my mouth shut, and I did my job, and I did. Me and David were partnered into a patrol stick, learned early on that he was ex-Bundeswehr, from West Germany at the time. Even showed me a picture of his American fiancée Patricia. David Koenig was an average-looking man, dark-haired, handsome, obviously well-built considering that he volunteered to join the Bundeswehr instead of being conscripted in. We got along pretty well. We were typically assigned the morning to evening shift, meaning we'd be able to go and get a drink together at night. Of course the man would always complain about the piss water we were served, but at $1 for a pint, we were quite happy. My friend would never make it to his own wedding in November. Honestly, they're probably not even reading this. It's been so long no one is probably even keeping track anymore. I'll finish writing the second part tomorrow. My hands are tired, everything feels so hard to do nowadays.